Thank you, delegates. Colleagues, I'm not really good at reading. I'd rather do it ad lib, but I'm going to do it reading, okay? In my final speech as president of the CPSU, I'd like to reflect on my years in office, which have passed very quickly. I've been very honoured and humbled to represent the CPSU at Executive, Vice President and President in the last 9 years since when I was first elected. Throughout my time on the Executive, I've met a lot of CPSU members, and I'm out of breath. Just in case anyone thinks I'm emotional, I am out of breath between running around the floor. I'm sorry. I've met a lot of CPSU members across the country who have become close friends and colleagues, and who I would never have had the privilege to meet if I hadn't become an activist in the CPSU. It is important that members who believe our grade should be represented at local and national levels should become active in their branches in the first instance. I would ask those members who want to see the lot of our grades improve to step forward and take an active part in their local branches by joining their respective committees. And those branches should set out to ensure that all new clerical officers joining the service are approached locally and asked to join our union. The future and strength of the CPSU depends on the current activists increasing our membership now that the moratorium has been lifted and new COs are being employed. Conference will hear details later of head office plans for a recruitment campaign, and local representatives will have a key role to play in this. Please ensure your branch's full cooperation, as this is in the best interest of the CPSU and those working in the grades we represent. I've always believed that the survival and future of this union is dependent on getting such activists involved at all levels and encouraging them to progress within the union. The 5-year rule introduced at the last Rules Conference 3 years ago has created more opportunities for activists to come forward and challenge for positions on the CPSU Executive Committee by ensuring there is a rotation of seats. This has greatly helped the cohesion within the Executive and lessened that perceived divide within it. This bodes well for the future. Practicing what we have preached, my colleague and friend Dennis Walsh and I decided this year we were not going to seek re-election to the CPSU Executive, although we were not required to step down under rule. A number of other executive members will also not be returning, and I wish them well. Indeed, who knows, someday in the future, they might decide to return and run again for office of the Executive. Talks with the Department of Deeper Public Expenditure and Reform on the restructuring of the staff officer grade and the executive officer grades are paused until after the CPSU and PSEU conferences are over. These negotiations have the potential to have a major impact on how we map out the future of this organisation. Previous annual delegate conferences have mandated the union to protect the staff officer grade as a promotional outlet for clerical officers, while in truth, the loss of members, should the SO grade be abolished, will also impact on the industrial and the workplace strength of this union, while also weakening our financial situation. It is imperative, given the potential loss of the SO grade, that the CO grade is not forgotten in these negotiations. I will leave it to this conference to instruct the incoming executive and the negotiators on what the membership expects for the CO grade in return. I anticipate the PSEU will also compensate the CPSU in line with IC2 policy on the transfer of grades and members if integration takes place. An issue has arisen throughout the SOEO amalgamation talk is that a number of CPSU members who have contacted Deeper to complain about the CPSU and accusing the union of holding up the process. Let me make this clear to those individuals. Deeper our employer body, decided when to open negotiations on this issue, not the CPSU nor the PSEU. Emails circulated and continue to be circulated by a very small number of members on this issue have ended up in an anti-trade union Sunday newspaper, which is intent on damaging the reputation of this union publicly and to cause embarrassment to all CPSU members. This is not acceptable. The majority of staff officers, and I'd say the large majority of staff officers in the CPSU, have the best interest of all CPSU members at heart and do not wish to see the clerical officers' future interest hampered. If someone wishes to weaken the CPSU bargaining position on any negotiated deal by this action, they should understand that it affects all CPSU members, and if they continue to act in this fashion, they really have no place in this union. We have continued speaking to other unions about amalgamation and merger options as instructed by ADC 2015. Delegates at the CPSU, PSEU and Impact conferences in 2016 will receive a full report on the progress on the potential setting up of a new single and stronger union, the New Union Project. A draft document by the outgoing executive committees of all three unions have been distributed to delegates at each union conference. Branch secretaries and chairpersons of branches have received a full briefing on the talks. I am looking forward to having a full and frank debate on this issue. The AHCPS and the VOA have withdrawn from the project, but may return in the future. The Executive Subcommittee dealing with the amalgamation has worked diligently and professionally to represent the views of the CPSU at each meeting with the other unions involved. We are still a long way from a final agreement, and I'd like to emphasise that. We are still a long way from a final agreement, but conference will review and decide on our continued participation in the process. I believe we should continue with the talks and bring a final document to the 2017 conference for ballot by the members. The subcommittee over the last few years has looked at a range of different options for the CPSU in the coming years. Last year, ADC adopted a report from the committee which identified three as having potential: the New Union Project, merger into British-based Unite, and the continuance of a standalone CPSU which would target new options for recruitment within and without and outside of the civil and public services at our grade levels. While we should be mindful of the other amalgamation / merger options identified by the subcommittee, I believe at the moment there is really only one on the table. Having discussed some of the other amalgamation options with these unions, I have not so far been encouraged by them to progress a merger process with them any further. Alternatively, we must seriously discuss the potential of continuing as a single entity, and this will have to consider having to go forward without the staff officer membership of nearly 1,300. A critical assessment must be made of our strength and ability to recruit new members in equivalent grades in organisations and companies where we have no presence or bargaining rights. Further, as a good employer, we owe it to the staff of the CPSU who work for us to ensure that there is clarity on their future in the same manner as we would expect clarity from our own employer. The decision on the route we must go must rest with the members who will ultimately make the final decision on a secret ballot following an ADC or special delegate conference. Outsourcing and a high number of temporary clerical officer positions has become a major issue of concern for the organisation. Within my own department, we have become alarmed at the high number of temporary clerical officers, 330, before the shorter working year kicks in. The current agreement on hiring of temporary clerical officers needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Equally, I'm alarmed at the apparent plans to drive more of our work outside to minimum wage and zero-hour contract workers in the private sector. We must resist these measures strongly if we are to protect our members' pay and conditions for the future. Last year, our members accepted the LRA, which provided the return of some cuts our members suffered over the last 8 years. While recognising that it had positives for our members, including flat rate increases for all grades, it is time to rethink our position on the basis of the upturn in the Irish economy and the forecasted growth rate of between 7 and 8%. CPSU members suffered more than most. In some parts of the private and semi-state sectors, earnings are increasing, while some never face cuts, even during the downturn in the Irish economy. Our members, through their sacrifices, have contributed greatly to the upturn, but there comes a point when our losses in pay and conditions must be reversed, and I believe that that time is now. One of my biggest concerns for both public and private sector is the demands by employers to have working hours increased without the appropriate pay. This is a major step backwards for workers, and it is workers, through their respected unions, who can prevent this happening and reverse those that have already happened. Delegates, I call on the government, if ever we get one, to repeal the FEMFI legislation, restoring all pay and conditions for all public and civil servants, including the removal of the pension levy in its entirety. I am proud today to address ADC in this the centenary year of Easter week 1916. I am conscious too that we have not, in significant measure, lived up to the ideal and goals of James Conlon and many of the men and women of the Revolution. But I am also proud to be a public servant, committed to serving in the best way possible the people of this republic. Public servants have continued through the last 7 years to put citizens first, despite the unjust attacks on our pay and conditions, even while those who caused the crash, the high-flying bankers, the developers, walked free, bailed out by Mama, even at the taxpayers' expense. Civil and public servants have done their patriotic duty, serving all the people, putting the Irish people first and foremost, and we will continue to do so in the years ahead. I'm going to run through the next part. I wish all nominees for officer and National Executive Committee positions the best of luck in their respective elections. As I touched on earlier in my address, I would like to thank the members for giving me the opportunity to represent you as CPSU President. I extend the very best wishes to the next person elected, which so happen to be from my own branch, Ambigay. I must acknowledge the help and support received throughout my term from the General Secretary, the officer and officials, administration staff of CPSU head office. I must also, and it's very important, stress the support I received from my branch colleagues, and in particular my colleagues in the PSO and my family, who supported me throughout the 9 years and gave me the time to put it into looking after ye. And last but not least, and I would never have had that, been able to dedicate that time. I'm going to weep it off because I didn't want to read this part. But look, I'm gone. The best wishes to everybody coming in, the best wishes to yourselves, and I'll be back at some stage in the future. Thank you very much. Take care.